Hey everyone, welcome to today's live stream. I am answering a question from somebody who is new to breeding goats, and she's going to be selling her first kid soon. And her original question was about mitigating the stress on mom and the kids when they go off to their new homes. And it sounds like really she's the one who is stressed, and I totally understand that. Because I used to be really stressed too when my kids would go to their new homes. And then 8 years ago when we started weighing kids regularly, I realized that I was stressed when I was selling kids that I just intuitively knew were not big enough to be weaned. So, from the time I started raising goats in 2002 until about 7 or 8 years ago when we started weighing our kids, we always my thing was like, "Okay, we'll sell our the kids can go to their new homes when they're 2 months old." Um, and I did finally start to get the feeling like, I don't think that this kid's big enough, but I didn't have any it was just like, I just worry about this kid, so I think it needs to stay here for another week or 2. And I would even tell people that, if you wanna if it's okay, if you wanna leave your kids here till they're 3 months, I'm totally fine with that. Um, and I'm talking about dam raised kids here, I'm not talking about bottle kids, I'm talking about dam raised kids. And so let me take a step back and just say what we did start doing 7 or 8 years ago, and that is that we started weighing all of our kids. I've got a video on YouTube that I made last summer that talks about chronic coccidiosis problems in baby goats. That is what I start getting a lot of emails and messages about in the summer is kids that have chronic coccidiosis. And talking about Nigerian dwarfs here, a lot of times what happens is these people have kids that are 3 or 4 months old, and I ask them how big they are, and they tell me something like 12 pounds, 15 pounds, which is grossly, grossly underweight. And so the reason that these kids have chronic coccidiosis is because they simply did not get enough milk when they were smaller. And if they've been sold, they were dam raised and they were sold, you can't get milk into a kid that old that has never taken a bottle before. So you're stuck with trying to get the protein and calcium in them with grain and alfalfa, which is not nearly as easy to get the same level of calcium and protein in them with solid foods as it is with milk. So they can consume a lot more calcium and protein with milk than they can with solid foods. So this is why like I hear people say, "Oh, why? Yeah, we can let the kids go. They're eating." That means nothing. You don't just wanna sell like, kids, if they are dam raised, they are gonna be mimicking mom and starting to nibble at things when they are 3 or 4 days old. Baby goats are born with teeth, and so they can eat, but what they're doing at such a young age is really just they're mimicking mom, they're learning. It's really not a big part of their diet. The biggest part of their diet for the first couple months at least is gonna be milk. That's where they get most of their protein and calcium from. And, so just check to see if there's any questions yet. Okay. Um, so anyway, you need to make sure they're getting enough milk. And so what we do is basically we check their weight on a daily basis for the first 2 weeks, to make sure that they're good. For our Nigerian dwarfs, we wanna see them gaining about 4 ounces a day. And if they're doing that, then they're generally gonna double their weight by the time they're 2 weeks old. Obviously, it's easier for a smaller kid to double their weight if they're gaining 4 ounces a day than a bigger kid, but sometimes when kids are born bigger, they're also piggier, and so if basically, you look at how much milk they need, and it's really based on their weight. So a big kid is gonna consume more milk, so they're gonna be gaining a little bit faster, than a small kid, but a small kid should still very easily double their weight by 2 weeks of age if they're getting enough milk. And then, by the time they are 8 to 10 weeks old, they should be, 20 pounds, which is about 1/3 of their adult weight. maybe a little less. For bucks are gonna usually be a little bigger, but honestly, a lot of times my bucks are way they're over 20 pounds by the time they're 8 to 10 weeks old. They're, into the mid-20s at that point even. So anyway, if I so instead of so now I do not sell kids. Like when people ask me, "When can I take the kids home," that I'm buying, I don't say 2 months. I tell them, um that the kids have to be at least 20 pounds before they can leave and 2 months old. So if they hit 20 pounds at 6 or 7 weeks, I'm still not gonna let them go until they're 2 months old, because we've noticed here even that if they hit that 20-pound mark and we start separating them overnight when they're 6 or 7 weeks old, that their weight gain slows down dramatically. They're not gonna be gaining that 4 ounces a day that they were gaining before. They'll only be gaining 2 or 3 ounces a day. Um, so it just shows how much milk really contributes to their weight gain. So you have to be proactive about that. Um, so once the kids so step number 2, once the kids are 20 pounds and, 8 weeks old, one of the things we like to do before they go to their new home is to start separating them overnight so that they get used to being away from mom for a few hours. So, usually we start out by, like, separating the kids about 10 o'clock at night, and then we go out there to milk at 7 in the morning, so that's like 9 hours, and then make that separation a little earlier in the evening so that you get up to 12 hours. And so at that point, then they get used to being separated from mom for half the day. They've already hit their 20 pounds, so they're still gonna be good there. And one of a nice way to separate them initially is if you have a wire dog crate. That's a good way to separate them from mom so that they can still see her, and she'll probably lay down right next to them to sleep. The reason I specify a wire crate is because if you put a plastic dog crate in there, goats will often jump on it, and it's not necessarily gonna be mom. If there's other goats in there, it'll be the other goats because they're like, "Oh, something to climb on," because goats love to climb. And so they could break it depending on how big your goats are. And they could, they will poop and pee on it. So it's going to get gross. So that's why if you have a wire crate, that's better than a plastic one for that reason. And then also, if you happen to be new to goats and you need practice with milking, you really want to do this because especially if you're selling, like, if mom had twins and you're selling both her twins at the same time, um, if you're new to milking and you haven't been milking her, and so you don't really know how to milk, and then you sell those 2 kids, then it could be a really miserable time for both you and the kids because you, are gonna have trouble milking her. Like, it takes us less than 5 minutes to milk a Nigerian dwarf, but if you're new, you I have heard people have told me that they're in there for half an hour, and obviously the goat is losing patience, she's starting to kick. I would lose patience too if you expected me to stand somewhere for half an hour. So, um, if that's the other thing too, is that initially when you are separating, you just milk her until, she starts to lose patience, and then you can put her back with the kids, and the kids will help you keep up the milk supply while you learn to milk. Because the other thing is that if, you're not good at milking yet, you're not gonna be able to completely milk her out, and so then you will wind up, with her milk supply dwindling. So you sell the kids, and then all of a sudden you think, "Oh my gosh, this goat's a terrible milker," and she's really not, but you're just not getting all the milk out, and then every day that you don't get all the milk out, her body is gonna think, "Oh, I produced too much yesterday," and it's gonna produce less day after day. And so this is one of the things when I started with goats in 2002, a lot of people back then, bottle fed their kids. In fact, you would go into a Yahoo group and you didn't even want to admit that you dam raised your kids because people thought you were labeled as lazy and not caring about your goat's health and that kind of stuff because people were still very concerned, especially about CAE, transmitting to kids through the dam's milk. So, I saw a lot of people in my early years who would have goats with terrible milk supply because, like, they were brand new to goats, they didn't know how to milk them. They would take the kids away at birth and try to milk them, and they were not doing a good job of it, they weren't getting all the milk out, and so they had goats with very poor milk supply, sometimes, even drying up. So and then they had to buy milk replacer to feed the kids. So, it's a really good idea to have kids that are gonna help you keep up that milk supply while you are learning to milk. Um, and then the other thing is that everyone worries about is the mom's stress. And this is definitely um, a real thing. Goats are very emotional animals, and they can get very stressed out. So I've had once in a while, thankfully, this doesn't happen very often. Once in a while, I have had does who just are running back and forth along the fence line wherever was the last place they saw their kid because they think that they've lost them and they're screaming. And usually that does not last for more than a day or two. I did have a goat once where that lasted for several days. And we were like, oh my gosh, when is she going to understand that the kid's gone? And she did finally. But, you don't she shouldn't stop eating or drinking, like, that's really super important. I had someone contact me one time, who was worried, about their goats, the way that their goat was handling it after her kids were sold, um, and they really thought that the goat was just stressed out about the kids leaving, and what it turned out to be was that the goat had a very heavy load of parasites, and it just coincided with, when they sold her kid, and possibly the stress of having her kid gone, exacerbated the stress she was feeling, but, stress definitely can negatively affect the immune system. In fact, a lot of diseases in goats are triggered by stress. I noticed someone asked if goats can get stress ulcers. Not really, but there's a lot of things like, if a goat has something, it can trigger it. So, like, if a goat has, some diseases, then having the kid anything that causes stress for them can cause that disease to flare up. So, like, CL, um, is a contagious goat disease that causes abscesses, like, right here over the lymph node, right here or other over other lymph nodes. So like if you have a goat that has CL and you sell her kids, she might get an abscess at that time. And so that's something to keep in mind. Um, but in general, just the whole immune system is very reactive to negative stressors. So other than that, like I said initially, the you really the biggest stressor was for me was always when I realized after we started weighing kids was when I was selling kids that were small. And very, very early on, when we only had goats for about 3 years, I sold a kid that died a few days later. And at the time I didn't know better because I had only been raising goats for about 3 years, but looking back on it, you know, it was a kid that was one of quads. He obviously had not been getting enough milk, and so he really, was like shouldn't have been sold at the time he was sold because he was too small. Um, so anyway, that's the most important thing to be aware of. And if you are watching this later and you've got other questions that I didn't cover, be sure to ask in the comment section below and I will get back to you. Thanks.